Hi, this is John. We're back here on Friday night with Shining Light on Shadows. Welcome, everybody. There's a few people here. There's not too many people on Facebook. Quite interesting, actually, because we stream across a couple of Facebooks. Where are we? There we go. Let's make sure it's turned on. And the sound's off, and that one's on. It is. So, welcome everybody. What are we talking about? We've been talking about the archetypes and their shadows for a week or two now, the masculine and their feminine equivalents. Archetypes don't have a gender, but I don't know. I think they're probably being written by men, so they tend towards the masculine. We're looking here at the masculine and the feminine. There isn't supposed to be a gender bias and for simplicity. And really, presently, a lot of self-development work is looking at the archetypes, the four archetypes, and then the male archetypes. And that's because it's easy. Looking at the archetypes in their fullness, the sovereign, the magician, the warrior, the lover, looking at them in their fullness sits with personal development. It doesn't deal with the shadow part of it, the shadow archetypes. It's looking forward. How do I become the mature sovereign that I need to be? That's creating a goal. That's creating a vision. That's looking into the future. I've said it before, Joe Dispenza's line, you can't create a new future if you're being held by your past, is why he said it. You can't sit in your archetypes, in their power, in their light, in their maturity, if you're being held by your immature, by your shadow archetypes. So shadow archetypes, shining light on shadows, use different techniques. Some of the techniques are meditation, journaling, looking at archetypes, looking at integral theory and spiral dynamics, values levels. All these different ways of assessing, looking at, really reflecting on what's going on for us, not just trying to create a new future, which we may fall into, but a lot of us that we've got challenges that we need to deal with. Personal development isn't set up to deal with that. And while the shining light on shadows with EMF, the elite mentorship fraud that I do doesn't go into what did I call it the other day? Trauma with a capital T. So trauma with a capital T is when you've been in a life-threatening situation, a situation that your psyche deemed was threatening to life. So it could be in conflict, it could be a car accident, it could be an operation. Anything that the mind is this is life-threatening, capital T. Shining light on shadows with the EMF, and where I'm coming from is to deal with trauma with a trauma with a little t. So trauma with a little t is significant emotional events. Now, personal development is looking forward. It's looking at creating visions, as I've said. It's looking at the the archetypes in their maturity, in their fullness. How can I become the sovereign in my fullness? Well, if you've got a whole lot of little shadows hanging around there, you're going to struggle to get into that fullness. And I would propose that stepping into your sovereign in your fullness comes with life of experience. Doesn't necessarily mean age, because age and experience are two different things. As Peter Sage says, there's lots of adults running around with teenage minds. Just because you're older doesn't mean you're experienced, but you need that experience, I feel, to step into your sovereign in its fullness. So if we look at the sovereign, isn't it, just as an example here, and I want to deal with the masculine this week. I'll deal with the feminine next week. So if we look at the light sovereign to the shadow sovereigns, the tyrant and the weakling, they're the two negative, the dark extremes of the sovereign archetype. Now we're going to sit somewhere within that triangular shape. We might be a compassionate ally, a creative innovator, guiding mentor. There's all sorts of different labels that I can put on them. But if I just read, so a light sovereign, somebody that encourages and embraces leadership and is confident, as opposed to somebody that addresses challenges with moving Moving the focus onto the victim, tyrant, a victim. Somebody who's acting as a victim. They're both sovereign and in its fullness and its shadow. Other ones could be somebody that teaches the importance of balance in life and coaching. So I'm going to particularly look at coaches here and how coaches can see it within themselves and see it within their clients. Tony Robbins asks a really good question. The quality of your life is relative to the quality of the questions you ask. And I disagree with that. I think the quality of the questions you ask yourself, that you hold yourself accountable to. And we can ask fantastic questions, but really going inside and being honest with yourself about what's going on. That's when the real enlightenment happens. So yeah, great questions. We can sort of put them off and pretend not pretend, but we don't really answer them. And to a certain extent, this is our ego. It's protecting us. And those questions that we ask ourselves, why am I not worthy? Even if we could get there with meditation and journaling, and maybe some of us can, but that's going to be a challenge getting down that far, down through the layers of the onion, if you like, through the layers of experiences to find out what the root cause of that sense of self-worth has come from. Because we weren't born with it. It didn't just appear. It's come from somewhere. Now, it's a different program to look at that as bringing that in genealogically, from the generations back. I'm just going to address the inner child work. So post-conception, through the early phases of life, pre-verbal, when we weren't in a thinking mode, when our mind hadn't put bits and pieces together. Now, the mind works by evolving and developing metaphors. It understands life, the world, the universe that we live in by metaphor. Eventually, we manage to start to put those metaphors in the unconscious into words, and then we speak a language and we start to communicate. It's fascinating people that have been brought up with a couple of languages, or in Asia, in Scandinavia, numerous languages. They have a different perception of life because they can express the metaphors differently. They have different ways of expressing and seeing life. So in those early phases of life, because we're non-verbal, because we can't critically process and think through words, just somebody online here. Let me just have a look at this. There we go. Where was I? Thinking critically. We're not at that stage of thinking critically. We're still sensing, feeling emotions. This is what it's all about. And this is why when we're doing the Elite Mentorship Forum, one of the early phases is mastering your emotions. Now, we spend a whole video, a whole period on looking at mastering your emotions. Now, the first step in any personal development work, and the biggest part of personal development, is self-awareness. That self-awareness, we say people are asleep and then they do a bit of self-awareness, of self-development, they start to wake up. And there's multiple layers, and it's why it's a journey, it's not a destination. You peel back one layer, you become more aware of yourself, more aware of what's going on. So that gold between an event happening and the behavior. So the event that triggered it, what were the chemicals? What were the emotions that started to go around? This is the gold. This is the area that you can explore in personal development where the self-awareness starts to kick in. And if you're asking the right questions and you're holding yourself to account to those questions, you can start to go deeper into the real core root causes of what's going on for you. So we're talking about the archetypes in their shadows at the moment. We sit somewhere in between, in the sovereign. We sit somewhere between the light sovereign, the tyrant, and the weakling. They're the 3 points of that triangle. We sit somewhere in between there. we're looking and wanting to achieve the light sovereign, our archetypes in their fullness, but different people are going to trigger us different ways, different events, different environments are going to trigger us and cause us to behave in a particular way. And this is what happens. An event happens, we're triggered at when we start to explore that trigger. Why were we triggered? That's exploring our shadows. That's when the real evolution, the integration starts to happen. And that can be quite confrontational. The ego starts to step in. The ego's job is to protect us. It's not going to let us go to those places. Where am I? Okay. It's not going to want us to go to those places. Now, our ego is not going to stop it. It'll it'll draw our attention away. It'll drag us off. It'll move us around. So, you know, is a light sovereign, you could say, and a lot of these comments I'm going to be looking at from a coaching perspective. Imagining you as a coach or a trainer, um, how do you react to different situations? So the light sovereign in the the light sovereign, they're going to be encouraging, they're going to be embracing leadership, they're going to be acting in confidence in themselves, and they're going to see it in their clients. So the question is, why am I not feeling confident? One of the big things that I work with is speaking, presenting on stage. Why do we struggle with presenting on stage? Weren't born with the fear of presenting on stage. It's not the actual presenting on stage. That's the presenting issue. I'm scared of going on stage. So, and I can do some really neat tricks, and I can use NLP and other things to get myself into a state to speak on stage. Can you see that? I'm dealing with the behavior, the cause, not the effect. And it's dealing with the effect. I don't have to deal with the cause because the cause is no longer there. So to stop someone smoking, the smoking is the cause, it's the result, it's the behavior we see. But if you deal with the actual core event, the significant emotional event, smoking is not a problem, because a lot of quite often when we stop somebody smoking, when somebody stops smoking or overeating, they go back to it. A few weeks later, after a period, they'll go back to it, or they'll find some other habit. We are now. Oops, now I've gone off. Any questions? I don't really ask questions too much. I don't really answer questions too much on here because I've sort of got a train of thought. I've got a process to run through. So where do we sit with the sovereign? Are you confident when you're working with the client? When I'm working with it, was really hard with the coaching that I do because I have to let go of having an outcome for my client. They've paid money, they expect an outcome, they want a result. But if you're coaching at any sort of level, that's your stuff as the coach. So take a step back there. What feelings are coming up? And it was hard work for me to understand that sense, trying to give value. Is it a moral thing? It wasn't a moral thing, but just sensing that if I understanding, the first thing was the understanding that if I don't think that they're getting their money's worth, their value, then I change what I'm doing. And this is the thing about shadow work and our ego and who we are turning up as. When we realize that it's not working, something triggers us, whether they trigger us or our processing because of what's happening triggers us, then we change what we're doing. And I had a lot of trouble letting that go because it's supreme arrogance to think that I know what's happening for the client. I have no idea what's happening for a client. We don't know. Nobody knows what's happening for somebody else in a relationship. We presume that this is happening, and then I change my behavior. So we presume that that's going on for them. So I alter my behavior to affect a result in them. So there's a cause and effect there. So what's happening is there's a trigger and I'm changing my behavior to it. So this is a good time, and it gets quite challenging to work at this level where you're recognizing that you're being triggered. What am I doing that I need to start to slow down here because, or change what I'm doing, or not change what I'm doing and let it go. Allow the client to come to their own understandings. Now, there's more to coaching, I think, than just that. Keep doing what I'm doing. You've got to understand the process of what you're doing. That's another program. That's another one. So I've talked a bit about the magician, sovereign there. Let's talk about the magician. Let's talk about the magician. So the magician, we've got the manipulate the magician and their power. But you've got the shadow, the manipulator, and the innocent, the shadow innocent. They're the three extremes of that triangle. So an enlightened magician, the magician and the powers, they're a beacon of wisdom, insight. They're using knowledge for the betterment of all. There's somebody that's taking information, is continuously pulling information, is somebody, but is also working in their fullness, is also working for the betterment of the person they're working for, or all mankind, or wherever the platform is they're on. So they're using insight, knowledge, wisdom for the betterment of all. Does that sound like you when you're coaching the person? Or the strategist. The strategist is the magician, but starting to move a little bit down towards the manipulator. The strategist, somebody who's calculating, shrewd, using insights to outmaneuver the opposition. Okay, so they're still using wisdom, they're still using insights, but they're using for their own benefit, the manipulator. And you get further down, the chess master. People seeing themselves above other people. That's shadow magician is somebody that's seeing others as pawns. They have a grand scheme going on. They're manipulating events. They're using their insights, their wisdom to get their desired outcome. Okay, and then ultimately the manipulator is somebody that is operating in the shadows, using cunning and deceit to control the situation. So we've got 4 archetypes we're talking about, and we'll sit. Some of them will, one or two of them will be predominant than the other ones. So where do we sit? If we look at the other side of that triangle, the weakling, the magician, the mature magician to the weakling, the dreamer, lost in their ideas, visions, inadvertently ignoring realities. This is the dreamer. This is partway between the magician and the innocent. And the innocent, of course, is somebody that lacks awareness of the broader picture. Just not aware of what's going on. They're easily manipulated. They're innocent. It takes quite a bit of work to get into understanding um where what the magician archetype is in its shadow and its fullness, and the sovereign and their maturity and their fullness and their shadows, to get a sense of understanding where I sit, telling myself, right, the sovereign in their fullness is this, and that's what I need to drive to, and that's what I need to get as a great vision. But the whole point of what we're doing here, shining light on shadows, is to also be aware and honest with ourselves and hold ourselves accountable. Where do I actually sit? Do I sit in my sovereign in their fullness? Or do I sort of slide a little bit towards the tyrant? In my magician, do I slide a little bit towards being manipulated? Do I manipulate others? Do I use my cunning, my wisdom to control the situation of what's going on? You can see when we start to look at the shadow archetypes that it's where we tend more to sit in different environments, different people will bring out different characteristics in us. So if we look at the magician, if we look at the lover, so someone at the top of the spectrum, the lover embodies the light, engaged, zest for life. They've got energy. They see the world through a lens of joy. It's the lover in their fullness. Now, the two shadows, the addict and the impotent, the addict somebody that's consumed by the pursuit of stimulation, whether it's substance relations or experiences. So this is someone that get the addict, obviously somebody that looks for, is consumed, is addicted to experiences, to sensing, to feeling, whatever it is. That's where all their focus is. In between there, you might have somebody who's the overindulger. They're starting to move towards the addict, but they don't have a balance when they're looking at anything. They'll pursue things to excess so that they get into self-harm. A little bit further up, you've got the seeker, somebody that isn't quite, they didn't see this life, they didn't see the world through the lens of joy. They hold the curiosity, but they're starting to look for more, the seeker. So that's up from the bottom, but that's sort of the going towards a shadow of the lover, the addict. The other side of that triangle is the impotent. So we have the dreamer. The dreamer's got, well, the romantic. The dreamer has got aspirations, desires. They may begin to retreat into fantasy. So now starting to not see the real world. And they become disillusioned with the real world. They start to withdraw into the real world. They become impotent. So this is down that side of the triangle, if you like, towards the impotent magician. The impotent, the deepest shadow, the deepest, the deep end of this shadow. The impotent is starting to become disconnected from life. They're unable to engage in the world. They're falling into this fantasy. They're living in this fantasy world. For whatever reason, the world's got too hard for them. They've had challenges, but it's just that thinking like that and that part of the world is more comfortable for them. And we'll go on to the warrior. Next week, I'll do the feminine ones. I just wanted to do the masculine ones this week. So the warrior, the mature warrior is somebody who's rigid, flexible, authoritarian, demanding, strict adherence. But this is power, this is not force. Okay, the warrior, the mature warrior in their power, in their fullness is in the power, not the force. Remember, something you learn in the Elite Mentorship Forum, power always overcomes force. Every time, all the time, every time. So a warrior in their fullness, I think the great line from the Bible is the meek shall inherit the earth. The warrior in their fullness is the characteristic of not having to draw. The sword remains sheathed. They don't have to draw the sword. The presence is enough. They have standards. You know where they stand. They keep to the rules. They enforce the rules. They hold everybody accountable. Now the two shadow angles, the two shadow extremes of the warrior are the sadist and the masochist. And if we look at the let me just look at this one here. Where are we? So if we look at the warrior, it's somebody who's courageous, disciplined, principled, dedicated. As I said, they're going to protect the vulnerable. They're going to hold the rules, but they don't need to use force. When we start to drift into the sadist and the masochist, this is when the force starts to take the lead over the power. So the warrior in their fullness is the power. So something, Gandhi was a warrior. Martin Luther King was a warrior in their fullness. Moral philosophers, warriors, code of honor. There was a lot of the old ancient leaders were warriors in their fullness. They ruled, I was going to say benevolently, but that's a sovereign in their fullness characteristic. Power, the warriors in their power are ones they're using by presence. They're being that warrior in their fullness by their presence. But as we slide down towards the masochist, the sadist, so sadists. So if you go to the sadists, you're looking at serial killers, sadistic criminals, abusive individuals, because they use force, they inflict pain, suffering on others. Okay, but we can sort of, if we look down there towards the sadist, but you get into the authoritarian enforcer, somebody who's rigid, flexible, or authoritarian. They're demanding, so they're inflicting the rules and the regulations on the population. They're starting to move into using force. So let's think about this as a coach. Maintaining a balance between setting clear boundaries and expectations, while also displaying empathy, being flexible in the coaching relationship, avoiding being overly rigid or authoritarian. So the approach and it's an approach that disempowers or demotivates the clients. So you want to keep your clients motivated. You don't want to set too rigid rules and regulations framework in place. It has to be some troubling with no issue with boundaries because you're enforcing the boundaries. So that's an authoritarian enforcer. That's somebody that's sort of between the mature warrior and the sadist. If we look at somebody that's sitting as a coach in the coaching environment, somebody that's sitting between the mature warrior and the masochist, they're people that sit in abusive relationships. So they allow toxic dynamics to run in the office, at work, in relationships. So they engage in self-sacrificing behaviors because they have a sense of duty or misguided purpose. See, this is not, obviously, that's not the warrior in their fullness, but it's also not quite the masochists. They're sitting in between there. So this is fascinating to, almost out of time, fascinating to look at these different archetypes in their shadows and recognizing honestly. And these are the questions. When I did that, what was going on for me? The quality of the questions that you answer honestly with yourself are going to start to show you where your shadows are. And the first biggest part of shadow work, shining light on your shadows, is to recognize, acknowledge them. And this is why meditation and journaling are really effective, because just that fact of acknowledging our shadow archetypes integrates them, lets them go. Journaling, just writing down what happened for you, putting it into words, allows that recognition, acceptance of those shadows. So think about shadow work, think about journaling, about meditation. And I will talk to you next week, and I want to explore some of the feminine shadows, which is quite interesting. Okay, see you again. Bye. That's me for this week.